Coming up on the Together for Good podcast, have we been thinking about church all wrong? I've got some thoughts about this. Here we go. Welcome to the Together for Good podcast, a podcast created by Bethany Lutheran Church in Cherry Hills Village, Colorado, and hosted by me, Pastor Nate Preisinger. On Together for Good, our goal is to provide practical, engaging content that supports you without expectations. Whether you're feeling disconnected from traditional religion or simply exploring what faith means in your life, we're here to walk alongside you. No matter where you are on your journey of faith, we're glad you're here. Welcome to Together for Good. So today, I want to talk about if we have been thinking about church all wrong, maybe not forever, but just recently in particular. I was listening to another podcast recently, and they were talking about church stuff. I listen to church podcasts, I know, occupational hazard. But on that one, they were talking about how this person had a Google review left for their congregation. And the Google review said, 5 stars, I went to a funeral there. And that's all it said. But in the discussion, the two hosts of the podcast were talking about how maybe this is actually the best picture of what church needs to be. Because there were other Google reviews for that particular congregation that talked about how great the programs were and how nice the pastors were and how wonderful the community was. And they were saying, doesn't that seem like you're talking about church as a product when the person who leaves this very curt review because they went to a funeral there is getting closer to what church is actually about? Church needs to be this place where we can be held during our deepest, darkest, most difficult moments, where we can hear about promises and hope in the midst of despair. You see, we have made church into another commodity, and we often talk about it in that way as if it's something that needs to be sold or peddled or that we need to convince people of. You should come to my church because it's this, it's this, it's this. The coffee tastes really good too. And notice how that's just putting us back in this mindset that we're living with the entire rest of the week. All week long, we're in this capitalist system where we got to go to work to make money in order to buy products that will hopefully, A, help us survive, but then there's the additional piece that these products will help us be happy or fulfilled or at least entertained for a few moments at the end of our day. And so when we start to put church in the same box, we miss so much of the value and the beauty and the possibility of what a church can be. Now, it's interesting because we clearly live in this 2025 society where this is just how things work, where you need to try and speak to people in the language that they have learned to listen to things. And so, yes, even the most well-meaning churches can often end up in a marketing type of mindset. How can we help more people understand and get connected with what we have to offer, the product we have to offer? But I think what churches need to do is change the game on all of this and think about it differently. Because people in our world today understand on some deep level, even if they aren't conscious of it yet, but they understand that this system that they live within the rest of the week isn't fully working for them. That going out and buying another product, while it might be exciting for a moment, it still leads back to a feeling of emptiness in a couple of weeks. You know this from when you were a kid. You'd be so excited for Christmas morning, you couldn't wait to get your presents. But by Groundhog Day in February, you were already sick of all the gifts you got for Christmas. We live still in a perpetual system like that, where we think that happiness is right around the corner. I've talked about this in many other episodes. Last week's episode was all about toxic positivity and pretending like you have it all put together. It's similar to that. Oftentimes, we get caught in this mindset that our fulfillment is only a decision away, only a moment away. And we create these weird parameters and convince ourselves, yes, once I get the promotion, then I will be happy. Once I buy the new car, then I will be happy. Once I go on to vacation, then I will be happy. This is a psychological treadmill that we have created for ourselves that always leads us back to that emptiness and despair. Because once the vacation's over, the happiness dissipates. Or once the promotion happens, we realize it wasn't all that it's cracked up to be. You see, disappointment is a real part of the human experience. And rather than trying to avoid that or cover it up, we need to figure out how to embrace it. And that kind of brings us back to this idea of church. We're trying so often to package church in the same language that we speak in all the other areas of our life. You need to come to church. Are you feeling unfulfilled? This is what will fix it for you. Come to church because we have great programs and nice pastors and wonderful music, and it will solve that emptiness in your heart. That's not totally true. We're turning it into just another product. And so we're playing the same game that we play all week long with all of these other factors. When in reality, what church is supposed to help us do is to encounter that honesty and that vulnerability and that brokenness, to face it head on rather than trying to cover it up again. And that's where we miss the point so often, is we try and make church just into the same type of solution as what we're always going after. When in reality, I think church offers us a different type of solution. It is very similar to some of the themes I talked about last week about this idea of embracing alienation and not just going for toxic positivity and pretending like everything's fine, but rather admitting the hard and then finding a way to encounter that and to heal it. And that's what a good church community can hopefully provide. Oftentimes we'll forget and try and get caught up in gimmicks and marketing and shiny, flashy little trinkets here and there. That's not what it's about. Church needs to be this place where we finally can find the people who are willing to connect with us on a similar level. Here at the church where I'm one of the pastors, every single week we start our worship service with a confession and forgiveness. And that can seem really rote now and trite, but it's at least on the right track. That the first thing we do is we admit that we don't have it all figured out. And in fact, we admit we can't do this on our own. And that as much as we've tried to get it right, we keep finding ourselves in the same broken, sinful place. That's how we start every week. And then from there, hopefully in that honesty and that vulnerability, that admitting and encountering our alienation, hopefully then from there, we can start to open ourselves up to hear of a God who wants to show us a different way of being and who loves us and forgives us even despite all of the games that we insist on continuing to play. And so within this, what church can hopefully provide, as I was saying, is that community or that space where maybe you can finally make a friendship or encounter a person who's willing to be with you in the hard moments and who's not just going to try and cover it up. Obviously, no church is going to be this perfect utopian place where everybody gets along all the time. I don't think that that's even realistic to try and hope for, but hopefully it can be a place where you find people like yourself who are willing to talk about these things. I know in my life, that has been what church community has provided me with. I didn't like everyone at all my churches, but I would find my people, so to speak, other individuals who believed in God. That was really important to me, who thought that there was a higher power and something more going on in the world. And additionally, people who, because of that belief, were willing to love me despite my faults and to talk with me about their faults. And that in that sharing of mutual alienation, in that admitting of our mutual struggles, deeper relationships were formed. I'm guessing you've had similar experiences. The people you are closest with are the ones who have gone to battle with you, are the ones who know your darkest secrets and love you and accept you anyways, or the ones who have shown up for you when things have been really, really difficult. You see, that's what a church needs to speak about and try and provide for people. Like that Google review, I went to a funeral there. Yeah, okay. And you thought that there was something about that moment when you were there saying goodbye to a friend or a family member that this church provided you with, provided you with a space and with a ritual and with an experience that somehow, it seems, based on your review, helped you deal with that incredibly hard moment in your life. Now, here's the other thing about church. We want to make it and market it in order to appeal to people. And I've already sort of laid out why I think that gets so difficult in our world today, because it's not what church should be about. And we need to be speaking to people on a different level and in a different way than all the other days of the week where we just are looking for more products and more entertainment. And yet we still get pulled back to that, don't we? We want our church services to be fun and exciting and interesting. And sometimes, we make them kind of gimmicky. And here is the additional reason why that's such a bad idea, is because we can't compete with the entertainment industry. If people want to be entertained, go to a movie. There are, and then think about the end of a movie, when the credits roll, hundreds of people have spent thousands of hours and millions of dollars to create this experience for you so that you could be entertained for 2 hours in a movie theater. And you paid $15 for that chance to be entertained by this experience. That's not what church will ever be able to do. And you know what? That's a really good thing as well. Because another problem, another part of our human struggle and brokenness is this constant need to be entertained. Now, I hope that church isn't boring, and yet maybe it needs to be. You know, people tell me a lot of times, like, well, my kids tell me all the time how boring church is. And I say, you know what, good. Because our need to be constantly entertained is part of what's killing us. We are not just needing to be searching for more and more and more stimulation and entertainment. Sometimes we need to escape out of that rhythm and that constant appetite for more excitement. Because it is like a drug in a lot of ways, where you just need more and more and more, something more exciting, something more impactful, something more shocking. That's where we keep looking for. And that is damaging to our soul. The simplicity and the rhythm and the repetition of a church service can be deeply healing for us in the midst of this world that is just saturated with entertainment, with endless scrolling. Do you remember when they came out with endless scrolling on social media? It used to be that to update your Facebook feed, you had to click the next page. And that was always this like incredible moment of clarity of like, oh my gosh, I've been looking at this for hours. But they got rid of that. It's so pernicious. Where the technology designers are like, you know what would be great is if the newsfeed never ended, if you could scroll forever. But it shows that we can easily be pulled down the rabbit hole and into this need to just be constantly entertained. And maybe church is a space where we get to break out of that, where it is a little boring. But you know what? In our boredom, isn't that where we start to encounter all of those dark, hard thoughts that we've been trying to avoid or push away? In boredom, isn't that an experience of vulnerability with ourself, where we come to realize all of the thoughts or the things that we've been trying not to think about, we've been trying to push to the side? Maybe we need spaces where we can start to encounter our true self like that again. I really think that that's what church provides for us. It's not perfect. It is so flawed, and it doesn't do this well. There are so many churches all the time who are just getting pulled back into the entertainment and the marketing and the gimmick business. And I understand why, because it feels like the only way to continue to support this dying institution. And yet maybe part of the reason that this institution seems to be dying is because we're trying to play the world's game when we've been given something so much better. And so can we start to create spaces where people are willing to encounter all that they've been trying to avoid about themselves, where people learn to accept their true self because they know that God accepts their true self. And then as we are existing in these spaces where we get to have that experience of love and acceptance despite our sinfulness, can we start to learn to extend that type of grace to one another? And in so doing, build vibrant, full communities of people who learn to share life together despite all its messiness, despite all its inconsistencies and struggles and all the ways we mess it up again and again. See, that's what I think church needs to be. And I know that it's hard to get there because it's scary and it doesn't fit within everything else that we try and do week after week, day after day. But I'll tell you a story. I think loneliness is the big connecting piece here, because we are this like incredibly fast-paced digital culture with infinite scrolling. But if you've ever scrolled through your social media feed for 15 minutes longer than you really wanted to, when you finally pull yourself out of it, there's that loneliness, isn't there? That emptiness that you feel like, geez, like I've just been absorbed into this screen for the last hour, and that's not the way I was meant to live. I wish I was with other people, because we were created for relationship. And hopefully church can provide that, as I've been saying. But to talk about loneliness for a second, my son and I came up with a phrase called scronely. It's a combination of scared and lonely. And it's how he and I have learned to talk about this phenomenon of alienation that I keep bringing up on different episodes. Scronely. And he's really become compelled by this idea and has been noticing the way that everyone in our world is, in some sense, just a little scared and just a little lonely, or maybe really scared and really lonely. But he was talking to me just out of the blue the other day about his friend. And he's like, I think my friend's scronely. I'm like, what makes you say that? He's like, well, he's always lying about what he can do and accomplish. He's always trying to make himself look better than he actually is. Apparently, this friend came over the other day and said, like, hey, I'm really good at basketball. I can beat you. And Solomon played him and absolutely crushed him. And that was the moment he was reflecting on. And I think he kind of wanted to tell me that story, so I knew how well he performed on the basketball court in the driveway that day. But also, it's like such a great observation for an 11-year-old to have, is just to recognize in his friend, like, oh my gosh, like, you're hurting. And you're trying to cover that hurt up with ego and with bragging and with outright lies about who you are. We're all a little scronely, I think. We're scared and we're lonely. And we need a place where we can encounter our true self again, where we don't have to keep covering it up, and where we can finally admit about our fear and our loneliness and our sin, our struggles, our mistakes, our bad decisions. And then to hear that we're loved anyways. Notice how that would bring such healing, and that would pave the way for someone to start living as their true self, because they wouldn't have to pretend anymore. They wouldn't have to cover up anymore. They could just show up as their flawed but loved self and know that that's enough. And if multiple people, if whole communities of people started to do this, wouldn't this change the world? You see, that's my hopeful vision of what a church could be. That's my hopeful vision of what the church could provide for the world. And I know that is not historically what's happened with churches. And as I've been saying all podcasts long, and now today, we find ourselves, just as has happened in generations ago, trying to play the world's game when we've been given something so much better. So there's some thoughts on how we could change the church, or how we might just need to adjust our mindset a little bit about what this is all about. Hope you found it interesting. And yeah, there's a lot there to unpack, and I'm sure I'm going to keep talking about this in future episodes. But if you'd ever want to talk about it, if you want to be a guest on the podcast, hey, let me know. We could bring it into the studio. I'd love to converse with some other folks about some of these ideas. But as always, thank you for listening. Share this with someone else who you think might need to hear it. And as always, stay in peace. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Together for Good podcast, brought to you by Bethany Lutheran Church in Cherry Hills Village, Colorado. To learn more about Bethany and for more great resources for your journey of faith, visit our website, bethany-denver.org.